Fake news. CNN, fake.
I tell people this is one of the reasons why that Trump supporters have such a negative view of media organizations outside of conservative media, because we spend a lot of our time fact-checking the president. We're spinning our wheels pretty much from the morning we wake up and look at our phones to the moment we go to bed at night and put our phones down. We're fact-checking the president, and it drives people crazy because we're constantly pointing out these falsehoods.
Let's go to, actually, hang on, John. Let's go to Jim Acosta. He's got a microphone on now. He's our chief White House correspondent. And Gloria said it. It was almost like he was in the beginning of 2020 mode. What did you make of his comments?
I've been told for weeks now that, and we've seen this play out on social media and so on, that the president, the Trump campaign, they plan to hit the Democrats over the head with this idea that they're socialists from now until the 2020 election. You heard the president start his remarks here at this joint news conference in that fashion, and then he was asked that question by a reporter with the Daily Caller right at the very end. The question was asked in a way that really teed it up like a game of t-ball here in the Rose Garden. The president was just sort of served up a softball there when he was asked, whether or not the Democrats are advancing a lot of socialist ideas.
Sagar Enjeti from Daily Caller. Sagar.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Two questions for you, sir, if I may. The first on the 2020 election. There's a growing number of Democratic candidates who have endorsed the idea of adding seats to the Supreme Court. Is that an idea that you would entertain in the remainder of your term or possible next term, or is that not something that you agree with?
No, I wouldn't entertain that. The only reason is that they're doing that is they want to try and catch up.
So if they can't catch up through the ballot box by winning an election, they want to try doing it in a different way now. We would have no interest in that whatsoever.
It was just sort of served up a softball there when he was asked, whether or not the Democrats are advancing a lot of socialist ideas.
Another question for you on social media. You tweeted in support of Congressman Nunez's suit against Twitter. There's part of a larger discussion that Senator Josh Hawley's been leading about making social media companies liable for the content that is on their platform, which they're not currently. Is that an idea or a change in law that you would support?
Well, we have to do something. I tell you, I have many millions of followers on Twitter.
And it's different than it used to be. Things are happening. Names are taken off. People aren't getting through. You've heard the same complaints.
The president was just sort of served up a softball there when he was asked, whether or not the Democrats are advancing a lot of socialist ideas.
Do you call it a falsehood? Do you call it a whopper? Do you call it a lie? My sense of it is we've gotten to this point now where I think we can probably feel comfortable regarding most of these statements as lies.
Now, of course, you're going to hear a lot of Democrats say over the coming days that this is nonsense, that supporting concepts like Medicare for all, having health care for all Americans is not socialism. And as a matter of fact, when the president was running for the White House, he also talked about universal health care. If you go back and look in the archives, On
my first day, I'm going to ask Congress to immediately send me a bill to repeal and replace Obamacare. Obamacare is a disaster. We're going to get rid of the lines. You know what happens when you get rid of the lines? You have tremendous competition. We have to get rid of the lines around the state, artificial lines, where we stop insurance companies from coming in and competing. When we get rid of those lines, you will have competition, and we will be able to keep pre-existing.
That the government would pay for it at one point, he said. And so this is all going to be part of the conversation moving forward. But I think, Brooke, the thing that has to be noted, and we'd be remiss if we didn't note it, is that when the president of Brazil mentioned the term fake news, he got sort of a smile and a nod from President Trump.
In conclusion, may I say that Brazil and the United States stand side by side in their efforts to ensure liberties and respect to traditional family lifestyles, respect to God, our Creator, against the gender ideology or the politically correct attitudes, and against fake news. Drawing inspiration from Ronald Reagan, I wish to bring to Brazil his administration style.
That when the president of Brazil mentioned the term fake news, he got sort of a smile and a nod from President Trump. And this is something that we've seen since President Trump came into office, called this network fake news, has referred to the press as the enemy of the people, and so on, is that this is a virus that is spreading around the world.
Attitudes and against fake news. drawing.
Can you give us a question?
Don't be rude. No, I'm not going to give you a question. I'm not going to give you a question.
Can you state categorically?
You are fake news.
Sir,
go ahead.
Mr. President, will you stop calling us the enemy of the people, sir? Will you stop calling the press the enemy of the people, sir? Mr. President, will you stop calling the press the enemy of the people, sir?
No. John Roberts, go ahead. CNN's fake news. I don't take questions. I don't take questions from CNN. CNN is fake news. I don't take questions from CNN. John Roberts of Fox. Let's go to a real. Let's go to a real network. John, let's go.
Well, we're a real network too, sir.
Well, Chris, I think that that address probably should have come with a Surgeon General's warning. It was hazardous to the truth. There were a number of claims that the president made in that speech that just are not going to stand up to the facts.
Everybody back there, the fake news media, look at them. They're fake news.
President of Brazil calling the press the fake news. He is trying to, in a sycophantic sort of way, suck up to the president of the United States. I mean, there's just no other way of putting it.
I assume when you say fake news, you feel they don't cover you fairly.
I'm not against the media. I'm against the fake media. If you look at CNN, the way they cover me, no matter what you do, it's negative, hits.
Yes, Jim Acosta.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wonder if you could comment on this disconnect that we seem to have in this country where you are presenting information about what's happening at the border, calling it an invasion, talking about women with duct tape over their mouths and so on. And yet there's a lot of reporting out there. There's a lot of crime data out there. There's a lot of Department of Homeland Security data out there that shows border crossings at a near record low.
Border crossings at a near record low.
Border crossings are still at a historic low compared to other times in our nation's history.
No, Senator, they're not. We're on pace for over 700,000 crossings this year. That's closer to historic highs than historic lows.
That shows undocumented criminals or undocumented immigrants committing crime at lower levels than native-born Americans. What do you say to
you don't really believe that stat? Do you really believe that stat? Take a look at our federal prisons.
I believe in facts and statistics and data.
Any more quick? Let's go.
I believe in facts and statistics and data.
They are fake.
But let me just ask you this. What do you say to your critics who say that you are creating a national emergency, that you're concocting a national emergency here in order to get your wall because you couldn't get it through other ways?
What do you think? Do you think I'm creating something? Ask these incredible women who lost their daughters and their sons. This is real. Okay?
President Trump is completely correct on this issue. We need to protect this country.
Okay, and thank you very much for sharing your story, ma'am.
Because your question is a very political question, because you have an agenda. You're CNN. You're fake news. Because they are the fake, disgusting news. You're fake news. And I want you all to know that we are fighting the fake news. It's fake, phony, fake.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to challenge you on one of the statements that you made in the tail end of the campaign. In the midterms.
Here we go.
If you don't mind, Mr. President, that this caravan was an invasion. As you know, Mr. President,
I consider it to be an invasion.
As you know, Mr. President, the caravan was not an invasion. It's a group of migrants moving up from Central America towards the border with the U.S.
Thank you for telling me that.
And why did you characterize it as such?
Because I consider it an invasion. You and I have a difference of opinion.
But do you think that you demonized immigrants in this election to try to keep...
I want them to come into the country, but they have to come in legally. You know, they have to come in, Jim, through a process. I want it to be a process, and I want people to come in, and we need the people.
Your campaign.
Wait.
Well, I was just trying to ask a question of the president at this press conference, and I was just trying to ask a question of the president at this press conference, and I wanted to challenge you on one of the statements that you made in the tail end of the campaign. Well, I was just trying to ask a question of the president. I wanted to challenge you on one of the statements that you made, and it was obviously a question they didn't like. It was about his racist ad on the caravan that they were running before the midterms. They're hundreds and hundreds of miles away. That's not an invasion.
Honestly, I think you should let me run the country. You run CNN.
All right.
And if you did it well, your ratings would be much better.
If I may ask one other question, Mr. President, if I may ask one other question, are you worried?
That's enough. That's enough.
Mr. President, I was going to ask one of the other folks.
That's enough.
Pardon me, ma'am. Mr. President,
that's enough.
Mr. President, I had one other question, if I may ask, on the Russia investigation. Are you concerned that you may have?
I'm not concerned about anything with the Russian investigation because it's a hoax. That's enough. Put down the mic.
Mr. President, are you worried about indictments coming down in this investigation? All I can say at that point is that I was trying to hang on to the microphone so I could continue to ask the president questions. Obviously, I didn't put my hands on her or touch her, as they're alleging.
Put my hands on her or touch her, as they're alleging.
My sense of it is we've gotten to this point now where I think we can probably feel comfortable regarding most of these statements as lies.
I like real news, not fake news. You're fake news.
I think he was yelling back at Jim, "You're fake news."
Right.
How do you...
For the president to then go off on CNN as fake news, to me, just made this entire spectacle seem like a fake news conference.
They have been fake news for a long time. They've been covering me in a very dishonest way. And what we want to see in the United States is honest, beautiful, free, but honest press. We want to see fair press. I think it's a very important thing. We don't want fake news. And by the way, not everybody is fake news. But we don't want fake news. Bad thing. Very bad for our country. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. If you don't mind, after I'm finished, if Ouija or Hallie or Vivian or one of our female colleagues could go after me, that would be great. Mr. President, just to follow up on these allegations against Brett Kavanaugh.
What does he mean by that? Explain. What does that mean?
I think it would be great if a female.
What does it mean? No, what does it mean?
It would be great if a female reporter would ask you a question about this issue. So if you don't mind,
I wouldn't mind that at all. No, wouldn't mind it at all.
All right. Well, let me.
Wouldn't make any difference to me.
All right.
Go ahead.
And a couple of things we do want to point out, though, very quickly. One is the president once again said that Barack Obama did nothing from August to November about Russian meddling. That is simply fake news.
I felt that the most effective way to ensure that that didn't happen was to talk to him directly and tell him to cut it out, and there were going to be some serious consequences if he didn't.
President Obama talked to Vladimir Putin at a G20 summit in September.
The thing I have to mention is that Barack Obama, when he was president, found out about this in terms of if it were Russia, found out about it in August. Now, the election was in November. That's a lot of time. He did nothing about it.
To talk to him directly and tell him to cut it out. And
he did nothing about it. They say he choked. Well, I don't think he choked. I think what happened is he thought Hillary Clinton was going to win the election, and he said, let's not do anything about it. Had he thought the other way, he would have done something about it.
President Obama talked to Vladimir Putin at a G20 summit in September.
And tell him to cut it out, and there were going to be some serious consequences if he didn't.
Otherwise is simply fake news. Barack Obama went farther, by the way, in that meeting with Vladimir Putin than President Trump is promising to do himself. He's not even promising to bring up election meddling in his bilateral with Vladimir Putin.
He's not even promising to bring up election meddling in his bilateral with Vladimir Putin.
The president opened the meeting with President Putin by raising the concerns of the American people regarding Russian interference in the 2016 election. They had a very robust and lengthy exchange on the subject.
The other thing that was fake news coming from President Trump is when he said, well, I keep hearing it's 17 intelligence agencies that say...
I heard it was 17 agencies. I said, boy, that's a lot. Do we even have that many intelligence agencies, right? Let's check it. And we did some very heavy research. It turned out to be 3 or 4. It wasn't 17.
Russia meddled in the election. I think it's only 3 or 4. Where does that number come from?
Where does that number come from?
As you know, the IC was a coordinated product from 3 agencies, CIA, NSA, and the FBI, not all 17 components of the intelligence community. Those 3.
Where does that number come from?
Those 3.
Where is this 3 or 4 number come from? My suspicion, Chris and Poppy, is that if we go to the administration and ask them for this question, I'm not so sure we're going to get an answer. And if we do get an answer, it'll probably be off camera.
When then President-elect Trump was briefed on this, there were 4 of us.
Where is this 3 or 4 number come from?
There were 4 of us. meaning the directors of NSA, FBI, and CIA, and myself.
This is another example of when the President of the United States says something here in the U.S., referring to the press as fake news, referring to the press in other derogatory terms, other leaders around the world, other governments around the world are listening.
The public gets it, you know. Look, when I go to rallies, they turn around, they start screaming at CNN. They want to throw their placards at CNN, you know.
Just because of the attack of fake news and attacking our network, I just want to ask you, sir.
I'm changing it from fake news, though.
Doesn't that undermine...
Very fake news.
I know, but aren't you... Real news, Mr. President, real news. Having been called fake news myself, that the President of the United States is the king of fake news. Ooh. He is the king of fake news. He said Barack Obama was not born in this country.
Barack Obama was born in the United States, period.
He said Mexicans are rapists and criminals.
And some, I assume, are good people.
We have to give every girl a pregnancy test over 10. This is not a safe journey.
He said Mexicans are rapists and criminals.
Coming from more than Mexico. It's coming from all over South and Latin America, and it's coming probably from the Middle East.
He said that he had the largest inauguration crowd of all time. I mean,
bullshit.
This was the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period, both in person and around the globe. Even the New York Times printed a photograph showing that a misrepresentation of the crowd in the original tweet in their paper, which showed the full extent of the support, depth, and crowd and intensity that existed.
He said that he had the largest inauguration crowd of all time. I mean,
you stand by your statement that was the most watched inaugural address.
Sure, it was the most watched inaugural. When you look at just the one network alone, got 16.9 million people online. Another couple of the networks, there were tens of million people that watched that online. Never mind the audience that was here. 31 million people watched it on television. Combine that with the tens of millions of people that watched it online on a device. It's unquestionable. I don't see any numbers that dispute that. When you add up attendance, viewership, total audience in terms of tablets, phones, on television, I'd love to see any information that proves that otherwise.
And then
do you dispute that?
Well, I don't want to get into numbers.
Well, I do.
And I don't want people to think that I'm saying that because, you know, I've got an axe to grind or I'm here to criticize or be political or have an agenda or whatever you were saying earlier.
Bullshit.
It's just a fact.
Bullshit.
You know, we've been saying, you know, there's an apple and there's a banana. You know, we've been sticking to apples. They're throwing out a lot of bananas.
Bullshit.
Why worry about a couple of tweets about crowd sizes?
Because it's not, because that's what I'm saying. You're minimizing the point here, Jim. It's not about one tweet. It's not about one picture. It's about a constant theme. It's about sitting here every time and being told, no, well, we don't think he can do that. He'll never accomplish that. He can't win that. It won't be the biggest. It's not going to be that good. The crowds aren't that big. He's not that successful. The narrative and the default narrative is always negative. And it's demoralizing. And I think that when you sit here and you realize the sacrifice the guy made of leaving a very, very successful business because he really cares about this country and he wants to, despite your partisan differences, he cares about making this country better for everybody. He wants to make it safer for everybody. And so when you wake up every day and that's what you're seeing over and over again and you're not seeing stories about the cabinet folks that he's putting or the success that he's having trying to keep American jobs here, yeah, it is a little disappointing. So it's, you know.
It's always going to be positive.
It's not. And sometimes we'll make mistakes. I promise you that. But it's not always got to be negative, Jim. Some days we do the right thing. Some days we are successful. Part of this is saying when we're right, say we're right. When we're wrong, say we're wrong. But it's not always wrong and negative. There's a lot of things that he's done already. A lot of amazing people he's appointed, a lot of success that he's having. And it would be once in a while for someone just to say, report it straight up. He appointed this person, here's their background, not why they're not going to get nominated. Not why it's not going to happen.
He talked about this conservative grievance that they're being discriminated against in social media. The president has, a gazillion Twitter followers. He has a massive presence on Instagram, has a massive presence on Facebook. Conservatives aren't being discriminated and abused on social media. They have just as much of a landscape that they dominate as the left does, and one could argue that they have a much bigger footprint.
Part of the issue is I think, instead of wanting to focus on the president's behavior, they'd rather focus on our reporting on the president's behavior.
Bullshit.
But the problem is that people around the country don't know it's an act. They're not in on the act, and they take what he says very seriously, and they take attacks from Sean Spicer and Sarah Sanders and what they do to us on a daily basis very seriously. They don't have all their faculties in some cases. Their elevator might not hit all floors. My concern is that that a journalist is going to be hurt one of these days. Somebody's going to get hurt.
No, you know what? You're creating violence by your question. You are creating you. And also, a lot of the reporters are creating violence by not writing the truth. The fake news is creating violence. And you know what? The people that support Trump and the people that support us, which is a lot of people, most people, many people, those people know what a story is true and they know what a story is false. And I'll tell you what, if the media would write correctly and write accurately and write fairly, you'd have a lot less violence in the country.
People this sense that all we're doing all day long is bashing the president, when in fact we have to be fact checkers, and so we spend a lot of time simply just fact checking the president.
And fact checking sounds like bashing to a part of the population.
I saw one story recently where they said 9 people have confirmed. There are no 9 people. I don't believe there was 1 or 2 people. 9 people.
He's just a dishonest, deceptive person, and it is how he built his media and real estate empire, and it's how he built his political brand.
Of May, there is no other way to describe what the White House is doing these days. Wolf, top officials, including the president, are hiding from the press. And Wolf, just to give you a sense as to what's happening right now, you can hear there is a chorus of boos and other chants from this Trump crowd here in Tampa, Florida. They're saying things like CNN sucks, go home, and fake news. Wolf, obviously, all of those things are false. We're staying right here. We're going to do our job and report on this rally to all of our viewers here tonight. Wolf.